That was great. So I told you that at the conference we were at this morning, the Russian speaker said that 23 years ago the Russians had a tragedy. That was the collapse of the Soviet Union. What I was going to respond to him is that in the mid-'70s, the Russian general said that because the U.S. was in such political turmoil and military straits, that the correlation of forces had shifted irrevocably to the socialist camp. 15 years later, the Soviet Union collapsed, and I think if the Russians want to go down this path, it might not take 15 years. We're having an intense debate in the U.S. about how to respond. It got off to a bad start. When the presidential hack was discovered and the White House was talking about things we could do, I met with some of the people from it, and one of their ideas was, well, how about if we leak Vladimir Putin's Botox injection schedule? And I said, is that the best we can do? And at the time, that was the best we could do, but it won't be the best we can do forever. And I think Jarno has pointed out some of the things we can do. And there's this feeling in the U.S. that we need to do more to impose consequences on bad actors in cyberspace. And it will take us a year or two to figure this out. Your work has been very helpful. As part of that process, though, the new administration, and just in case you're curious, I think most observers would agree that the Russian interference really didn't affect the outcome of the election. It was inappropriate, it was a violation of sovereignty, it was a hostile act, but it probably did not change the election. So we have a new administration. It's off to a somewhat slow start, but they have some very good people. You saw two of them yesterday, in Tom Bossert and Rob Joyce. And so to tell us what the cyber strategy might be in the new administration, we have Herb Lin, who is both a longtime denizen of Washington and now a distinguished academic at Stanford. So Herb, if you could. Thank you.
So one of the advantages of not being invited to the Munich Security Conference is that I didn't have to wear a tie. So So what I have to say here is not based on detailed discussions with anybody in the new administration. Okay, so this is I offer it to you as somewhat informed speculation based on what's been reported from what I regard as reliable sources, i.e., things that I don't regard as fake news. Some of the source material for this are two documents, both on the web, one classified, the other one not. The one on the right was released in April of 2015 as the DoD cyber strategy. That's the most authoritative statement to date about what the U.S. Department of Defense cyber strategy is. On the left is a memo called U.S. Cyber Operations Policy. This was leaked by Edward Snowden. It is still classified as top secret in the U.S. So any of you who have secret clearances are not allowed to read it on the web. The rest of us are. The blackout in there is the one classified piece of material, on the front page that I had to black out for those of you who do have clearances, so it's legitimate for you to see this page. Okay, it's available on the Guardian page. Just do a search on PPD-20. And I don't have clearances, so I'm not violating any rules here. Under Obama, the U.S. view of U.S. Offensive cyber operations, that is the stuff that causes pain and anguish to the other guy, here's what it said. From the DoD cyber strategy, it said that offensive operations have a definite role as instruments of U.S. military power. It was the first time that the United States had explicitly made such a claim, overtly, explicitly, in a document. It said that such operations would be conducted in accordance with the laws of war. It specified the kinds of targets that were legitimate, that were regarded as legitimate military targets. It said when these might be used. It said, for example, that offensive operations may be conducted during periods of heightened tension. What does that mean? That's before anything actually starts shooting. Now that's an interesting point, because it says that if you're going to use cyber operations before shooting, that's an indication of that's the thing you're going to be using first. Okay, if in a tense situation, it's the closest thing you can come to using force without actually using force. And DoD Cyber Command is not precluded from providing offensive cyber capabilities for the intelligence community. That is, the report says we'll work with anybody in the U.S. Any appropriate agencies within the U.S. government to assist. That's a nod to the fact that the DoD often provides support in the form of personnel and equipment and so on to conduct operations that are undertaken by the intelligence community. Okay. If you go back to the middle statement there about military-related critical infrastructure, it says that if you're willing to target military critical infrastructure, then you might be going after dual-use stuff as well. And so there might be some implications for civilian use, for civilian interest in there that you have to take into account. Interesting points out of PPD-20. Okay. It directs relevant agencies to start assembling a list of potential targets of national importance. It's developing a target list. Okay. The only other situation that I know that there's a national target list like that is in the development of the target list for nuclear weapons. Okay. There's a list of targets that we have for nuclear weapons. We're starting a list of potential targets for cyber operations. That's an interesting. That's interesting, and it says that it requires specific presidential approval. The guy at the top has to say, "Okay, for offensive operations with significant consequences, which are defined there: loss of life, significant damage to property, and so on." Okay, so those are interesting. Those are interesting statements, but it says that the president has to decide. The worldwide threat assessment of the U.S. intelligence community made a point which a lot of us have been trying to make for a long time, that we don't believe in a cyber Armageddon anymore. We mostly believe in something that imposes low to moderate, that an ongoing series of low to moderate level cyber attacks from a variety of sources that will impose cumulative costs, sort of death by 1,000 cuts. During the campaign and shortly thereafter, here's what Trump said about cyber. I will make certain that our military is the best in the world on both cyber offense and defense. The United States must possess the unquestioned capacity to launch crippling cyber counterattacks. I mean, I mean crippling. Okay. Cybersecurity is not just a question of developing defensive technology, but offensive as well. We have to turn cyber warfare into one of our greatest weapons against the terrorists. On the White House webpage, on Inauguration Day, we'll make it a priority to develop defensive and offensive capabilities at U.S. Cyber Command. America First foreign policy. We will we'll work with international partners to engage in cyber warfare to disrupt and disable propaganda and recruiting. And in fact, when Tom Bossert spoke, he spoke about a joint initiative between the U.S. and Israel, which talked about denial of cyberspace to adversaries and so on. Clear references to taking the offense in cyberspace. Now, what does all of that mean? What does more aggressive use of cyber operations mean in cyber? What might that mean? Okay, if you take it's clear from those statements previously that there's an intent to use cyber operations more aggressively. He doesn't mean building thicker. The president doesn't mean building thicker and thicker walls around systems. Okay? That's not what he means. It means taking the fight to the adversary. Okay. Here's what I speculate. First, that there's going to be relaxation of the requirement for specific presidential approval for offensive cyber operations with significant consequences, which to me means, in the end, greater delegation of cyber authorities to the theater commanders. That is, the United States organizes its military forces around the world into 6 or 7 geographic commands. Each one of them has a commander-in-chief, a 4-star admiral or general. And my prediction is that they will get more authority to conduct cyber operations to support their efforts. It also means elevation, eventually, and maybe soon. I think it's supposed to happen pretty soon now. I think there's legislation about that that's already passed. To elevate Cyber Command from being underneath U.S. Strategic Command to being a command, a full unified command on its own. That is, it won't have to ask Strategic Command for permission to do anything anymore. So it'll have the capability of operating independently in terms of lines of command. So that's an interesting observation. Less oversight. Instrument of first military use when diplomatic, economic, law enforcement measures fail. I'm not here to say that the new administration is going to resort to force, even cyber force, as a means of first resort. I'm not saying that. But in the event that diplomatic and economic and law enforcement efforts don't succeed, cyber is going to be the first first military force that's going to be applied. If you think about what that means, it has several implications. One is that there will be continuing or expanded efforts to establish a ubiquitous presence on all potential cyber targets. One of the realities of cyber attack is that if you're going to attack a target today, you need to have infiltrated it 2 years ago in order so that you have access to it. You have to scatter out all the vulnerabilities and get all the access paths and so on, and you have to maintain them. Okay? And since you don't know 2 years ago what you were going to attack, what you wanted to attack today, you have to do it everywhere you can possibly do it. Okay? And I suspect that there's in here an implied greater willingness to use active defense measures, that is disruptive or destructive active defense measures when you get attacked, when the U.S. gets attacked. This is hackback of sorts. Okay. There is something called the, quote, vulnerabilities equities process, which is supposed to say the United States has identified a vulnerability in a system. Question, do we stockpile it for our own use, the U.S.'s own use, or do we tell the vendor about it so that they can fix it? Right now, the bias in the process is allegedly towards disclosing it towards the vendor. That's what is claimed. Okay, and maybe that's true, maybe it isn't. But in any case, I think that process is going to change to be more biased towards keeping them around for future use. Okay. And there is, in Trump and during the campaign, came out very much against Apple in its decision to not cooperate with the FBI in unlocking a terrorist's phone. Okay, and that debate has gone on for a while. Obama came out, tried to push that off, saw the difficulty of that decision, and tried to keep it away. In the end, probably said, well, I have to go with law enforcement, but he was reluctant. Trump will go down that path enthusiastically, okay, siding with law enforcement. Federal executive order issued last month on strengthening infrastructure. It only had a few things in it that were not generation of reports. Holding agencies heads accountable, managing cybersecurity risk as an executive branch enterprise, using the NIST framework, a particular framework for protecting critical infrastructure, and ordering that everybody has a preference for cloud. Not bad, but sort of modest efforts in that. Some outstanding issues that we don't know how to react to. Okay, how to interpret presidential tweets on cyber or anything else. What do we make of it? Okay, if anybody knows how to get a clear statement of policy out of this administration, come see me. I'd like to talk to you. Okay. Cyber strategy with respect to Russian operations in particular, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think that, if you think about the election hack, it wasn't really a hack of an election, in a sense. It wasn't a cyber hack of an election. Yes, they got emails, but people have been getting emails all the time. Okay, what the Russians were able to do was able to leak it and distribute information selectively and amplify information and do all that sort of stuff. Most of it perfectly legal. The only illegal thing they did was to attack attack John Podesta's and the DNC's email. Everything else they did, as far as I can tell, was legal. Okay, that might have had some effect. Now, is the U.S. going to respond in that respect? To Russian interference? Well, when the guy at the top says, no, they didn't interfere, what we're going to do is not clear. Okay, it'd be interesting to see. And the significance of resolving details, quote, details of cyber operations to people down at the lower level is at least questionable. Okay, you wonder about it. Are military commanders really the best parties to decide on diplomatic and law enforcement and economic equities? I don't know that I would answer that question yes. We'll see. And then, think about the possibility that somebody at the top might be an impulsive decision maker, right? Maybe, okay? Imagine that instead of a cruise missile strike on Syria, there was a large-scale cyber attack ordered with the same kind of careful thought and deliberation that went into that. Okay, so it's an interesting question, and these are all questions that we don't know how to what to make of. So if anybody wants more information or comments on this, come contact me, and I think that's the end of my comment. Thank you.